I'm Ramin Taloui, Distinguished Policy Fellow here at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research. And I am delighted to introduce for this next session, Erik Brynjolfsson. Erik is the director of Stanford's Digital Economy Lab, professor and senior fellow at Stanford's Institute for Human-Centered AI, and a senior fellow here at SIEPR. What distinguishes Erik is that he's been thinking about and producing scholarship on the impact of technology on the economy and workers for decades. I had an idea that I thought was novel, a framework for thinking about to bring to the impact of AI, did a little bit of research on it, and Erik had literally written a paper about that in 1993 or 4 as applied to IT of the early 1990s. He's the author of touchstone books in the field like The Second Machine Age, Machine Platform Crowd. He's always thinking not only about where technology is and has been, but also where it's going. And we're lucky to have him address that topic here today. Welcome, Erik.
Thank you, Ramin, for that nice introduction. It's true, I really am as old as he says. Ramin asked me to talk a little bit about AI and labor. Lindsay touched on some of the work we did together, actually, that she mostly did, and I wrote along with her, which was fun. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that AI can be used for collaboration, augmentation. We heard a little bit about that. Maria and others talked about that. And I especially want to have time for questions and discussion. I heard some great questions before. I'm happy to weigh in on some of those. I'm sure you have some new questions. So think about those. AI and labor, but also more broadly about AI and the economy. As Ramin said, I've been thinking about a lot of these issues for a while, and I'd love to get your thoughts as well. So what do we know? Well, there's a lot of excitement about this. And if you read the headlines, there's a talk about an apocalypse, a bloodbath, another apocalypse, another bloodbath, people living in trailers. So it's kind of scary. I also hear, companies. I was talking to the CEO of IBM, Arvind, 2 nights ago, and he was saying, we're actually hiring more people, and there's examples of that happening as well. And honestly, I didn't know quite what sense to make of it. People are saying this is all overrated, and others say, no, this is really a problem. And in any given month, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are losing their jobs. There's hundreds of thousands of people who are being hired. So you can kind of find examples of either one of them out there. What we want to do is get some systematic data and understand better what was happening. Here's another one, Dario, talking about half of all jobs disappearing and unemployment spiking. It did go up 0.1% this morning, I think. So we'll see. But we got a bunch of data from ADP that really allowed us to look at this more closely. So first I'm going to show you some of the results from that. And ADP is the world's largest payroll processor. It's very recent data, a much larger sample than you get, say, from the current population survey or some of the other data sets that we tried to look at that were a little noisy for this particular question. So we were able to get much more visibility, and we did this paper, Canaries in the Coal Mine, about some of the early results there. And Bharat Chandar and Ruyu Chen, are either of them here? I don't know if they came by. No? OK. So we dove into it. We wrote this paper. We just got 2 more months of data, and all the charts I showed you there actually extend and do more of the same as what I'm already showing you here. And we'll keep updating it every month as more data comes in. So let me just show you some of the headline results from that. The first thing is just what's happening to different age groups just overall. Is are young people facing an apocalypse? And actually there is a little bit of a slowdown there. So if you look at the blue line there, the dark blue line, that's early career people. And definitely the past couple of years, employment is leveling off or growing slower for them. So if you've got kids that age group, they're not just whining. There really is something happening that's slowing things down a little bit. Older workers, mid-career workers seem to be doing a little better. But things get much more interesting if you zoom in on particular occupations. And the BLS has about 950 different occupations they divide the economy into, economists, radiologists, bus drivers, et cetera. And if you look at things like software developers, wow, it's really quite different. There you see about a 20% decline since the introduction of some of these large language model tools. They were doing fine up until late 22, early 2023. And then there's this massive divergence. And what was surprising to me was just how different it was for younger people versus older people. Almost all of the effect is that entry-level group, age 22 to 26, or maybe a little bit the next one up, the orange line, 26 to 30. And there's reasons why you might expect more there. Most of it, when we looked at it more closely, is not from people being laid off, it's from people just not being hired. And naturally, young people are the ones that are facing, on that margin, facing more of an effect there. Now, coding is a little bit special. There was a kind of a potential overhiring and then some people being cut backs quite a bit, especially in the tech industry. But we see similar effects in a lot of other occupations as well. Call centers was mentioned, customer service. And there you also see about a 15% decline. In fact, if you take those 950 occupations and you rank them all from the most exposed to the least exposed, and there's different ways of doing that. Elandu et al. Have a ranking of every task in the economy, and they score it as to whether or not an LLM can help with that task. Writing a memo, LLMs can definitely help with that. Summarizing a document, LLMs are great at that. Lifting a box, LLMs don't really do that. So as you go through all the occupations, you see that some are more exposed and some are less exposed. The top 20% of occupations, about 180 occupations, look very similar to this. If you take the overall averages in the paper, it's basically what you see here. Some of them a little bit more, some of them less, some of them not happening. But basically, the most exposed occupations on average had about a 15% drop. On the other hand, if you take the least exposed occupations, so like health aides, LLMs aren't very good at putting in IVs or helping someone into their bed or something like that. They did not have this effect. In fact, look at the blue line there. It's actually growing somewhat faster. So maybe there's a reallocation there. Maybe people are moving across. But you see very different effects depending on whether AI is being used in those sets of occupations. Now, this is not like a careful causal estimate like we did with Lindsay, where you're able to get much more precision on this. This is just looking descriptively at what's happening in the labor market. But in the paper, we did a lot of work to look at some alternative hypotheses. What if you take out coders? What if you take out the whole tech industry? What if you take out, you get more or less same effects? What if you control for remote work? Look at people with and without remote work, or same basic effects. What if you look at interest rates? There's these interest rates soaring and falling suddenly, and look at interest rate sensitive occupations. If anything, it goes the opposite way. It makes these effects a little bit stronger. So we tried a number of these alternative hypotheses, and we didn't see anything that significantly changed these numbers. We're going to continue to dive into it. One of the things that gives me some concern is just that, as I mentioned, we just got a couple more months of data, and Bharat and Ruyu showed me the updated charts, and they're just continuing the way that we're seeing right now. So I'm not ready to sort of extrapolate this out till, for the next few years, but right now we are seeing some pretty different effects for the different groups there. And here's sort of a summary a little bit of the orange is the most exposed, the blue is the least exposed, and you can see that the most exposed have this pattern where younger people are much more affected than older people, whereas for the less exposed people, there's not really much going on there. So what could be explaining this? And so, we're thinking of a little bit of how to think about this, and this was written up a little bit in my paper with Lindsay. One way to think about it is there's different ways of creating software. And software 1.0, the old way that all of us have done at one point is, you write a computer program and you apply it to some data, and if you do a good job coding, it will run. Probably not run the first time because it's very sensitive. If you don't really understand the steps and you do something a little bit wrong, it won't run at all, or it'll give you the wrong answers. But if you can really understand the process well, you can apply it to some data and you can get some output. And that's an incredibly valuable paradigm. It's been used for decades now. You basically take a process and you codify it, then you digitize it, and once you've digitized it, you can replicate it. Now it can be used all over the economy. Literally trillions of dollars of value have been created with this software 1.0 paradigm. But now there's a new paradigm, which is a little different. And the new paradigm is machine learning. Now, rearrange things just a little bit. The inputs and outputs are both used by the computer to generate the computer program. So if you have lots of digital data on inputs, like all of the purchases that people have made, and lots of other digital data on the rating, whether or not it was fraudulent or not fraudulent. Now the system can find patterns that relate those two. Or here are pictures, and here's the labels of whether it's a dog or a cat or cancer. And the system can start identifying what the patterns are. If you have enough data, machine learning will learn what the relationships are instead of us humans have to figure them out. That is a game changer because now there's a lot of tacit knowledge that we don't know how to codify. There's a lot of things that we've never figured out at all, and the machines can start finding those patterns. So there's a gold rush going on right now, even more trillions of value being created as people apply this software 2.0, this new paradigm, in addition to the old one, to all sorts of different problems. How does it relate to what we were just talking about? Well, let's think about where this new paradigm works best. Well, I already told you it works best when there's lots of data, not just on inputs, but also outputs. Just about every task has a chart that looks a little bit like this, where there's some frequent examples and there's some rare examples. You know, driving is mostly very common situations. Every once in a while you see 6 black swans go across the road, and that doesn't happen too often, but it could. Or in the call center context, you know, people are asking, how do I change my password? That's a question that they get a lot. Other times there's a very obscure tax question that maybe shows up once in the data set. So which ones are machines going to be better at? Well, naturally, they're going to be better at the ones where there's more data available. Like maybe humans aren't so bad at those either. If it's super common, everybody kind of knows the answer. But if there's enough data, machines can start really chugging and coming up with the answer to that. On the other hand, what if there's not a whole lot of data? Over here, now machines kind of struggle. If they've never seen it before, they don't have any basis for doing that machine learning. Humans aren't great either, but compared to machines, we're a lot better. One of our superpowers is being able to improvise and kind of figure out things even if we haven't seen them before. At least circa 2025, that's a relative comparative advantage of humans. So, you know, you've got these two different things. You've got where the machines are better, where the humans are better. Which ones do entry-level people mostly deal with? They often deal with things that are just, you know, we've seen a lot. This is the standard solution. They aren't as good at dealing with the rare cases. That takes a little bit more nuance and experience and expertise. And so you see, you see a little bit of a differentiation where the machines are often overlapping more with the skills of the younger, less experienced workers, and that may be part of what we're seeing there. So, you know, sorting through this, and it would be good to have a discussion about some other hypotheses about what's going on. Let me talk a little bit about going from automation to collaboration, a topic that came up in the last session as well, and I thought was really important, really interesting. So there's a set of results that I want to pull out from the paper with Lindsay and Danielle, mostly Lindsay, I should say. She mentioned this briefly, but she didn't get to use slides, so I'm going to put up one of the slides. The biggest effect was on the newest agents. And so what we saw there was that there's a big effect, 30–40% productivity gain, in this case on handle time, and, the answers per hour, I think it was. But there you see the more experienced workers, and in a call center, there's a lot of turnover. So even after 12 months, that's considered a very experienced worker. There was almost no gain, or you know, the point estimate's a little bit negative. The standard bars say that it's not really distinguishable from 0. Likewise, on the skill levels, you see if you divide them into different quintiles, 20% for each group, the lowest quintile had the biggest productivity gains, and the highest quintile, those who were already doing things well, not so much. Once again, what's going on there? Well, the most experienced workers were the ones who were providing the answer. The machine was learning from these millions of conversations how you answer. And where does it get the good answers from? Well, from the good workers. And so if you're a new worker, that's great. You're now getting tips and tricks from the best people. If you already are giving good answers, you're kind of getting back the same thing you're already saying, so there's not a whole lot of lift there. You're just basically, yeah, I know that. I was the one who said that before, and that's what the system was being trained on. And you can see this also in the nature of the conversations that are going on there. So we did natural language processing, and you can see how similar are the conversations. And the blue dots are the people not using AI, and the similarity between the low skill and high skill people was about 55. And as they used AI, they started becoming more similar to the high skill workers. They started using some of the same stories, some of the same vernacular. They started jiving the same way. And that was basically evidence that these systems are kind of homogenizing and getting everybody, leveling up people to be more similar in the way they're answering questions. Let me zoom in specifically on this automation versus augmentation question. So going back to the study using the ADP data, another way we sliced the data, we looked at occupations that were using the large language models primarily to automate work, just replace it, hand it off to the LLM, and others where they were using the large language model mainly to augment. They were saying, teach me how to do this, show me a new skill, let's work on this together. In the cases where they were using it to automate work, and there's a lot of data here, I'll walk you through this. Let's focus on the top left corner, the early career people. And I'll just have you zoom on two of the lines there. There's the red line and the black line. The red line is the overall average employment. It's kind of flat, like I showed you earlier. The black line is the people who are using AI a lot. And as you can see, it's falling. The black line is below the red line. So that's the results I showed you before. Automation was correlated with falling employment for those workers. Now let's go over to augmentation. So this new chart here is people using this system to augment, to learn new skills. The black line here, the darkest black line, are the people who used it most intensively. In this case, it's above the red line. So what does that mean? They're actually higher employment for the people who are using AI to augment rather than to automate. Both of them increased productivity, both of them increased performance. One group, it was more productivity with less employment. The other group, the augmentation, was more productivity and more employment, more widely shared prosperity. So there's a little bit of glimmer of hope and opportunity there, and I'm glad it was brought up in the earlier panel, that you can use AI in ways that not only creates value, but creates shared prosperity, and that's when you use it in this augmenting method. And here's the same data represented a little bit differently, so it might be a little better. You can see that on the left, as automation increases, you just get more and more of the occupations declining. But on the right, augmentation, it's kind of an inverted U. The people who are using the LLM a lot for augmentation had fewer people who were losing their jobs and relatively more that were growing. Let me just wrap up with a little conceptual thoughts about augmentation versus automation, and I really want to take your questions and spend a good chunk of time for that. How many of you guys have ridden in a self-driving car here? So most of you, okay, yeah. I did a talk, believe it or not, earlier this morning with a group of people from a very large consulting company, and less than a quarter of the hands went up. So you guys are more likely to be using the autonomous cars. So there's lots of them here around here, which I guess a lot of you live here. You can now take these cars from right from here all the way up to San Francisco as of like a week or so ago, which is great to see. The first time I did that was actually back in 2012, and there's Andy McAfee and I, my co-author on Second Machine Age. We rode a car in 2012 from Mountain View up to San Francisco, and I got to say, at that time, I thought, wow, we're just about there. I mean, it rode all the way. A few little details to be worked out. Here it is, 13 years later, and we're just beginning to see that same trip be done broadly and commercially and rolling out to other cities. So it takes a lot longer, but it is, I mean, that's a long time for us, waiting around a decade or more. In the greater scheme of things, I mean, I think people will think it happened relatively quickly. But one way to think about it is you're going through these different levels of autonomy from 0, no automation, over to 5. Right now, I guess the Waymo cars would be categorized as level 4. They can be autonomous within a prescribed set of geographies. And most cars are down at level 1 or 2 or 3. So we're kind of in the middle there somewhere. I think we can take a framework like this and apply it not just to cars, but to every task in the economy. And some of them, we've gone all the way over and we've fully automated them. Others, really, humans are doing them entirely. And there's lots of them that are there in the middle. D.E. Yang and I, we have a human agency scale that does this. We decided to flip around the axis a little. But the middle there is the equal partnership one where humans and machines are working together. And we're in the process of categorizing all the different occupations about where they are on that scale and how we're progressing through them and where they're working. But there's a ton of value in that equal partnership one. And as I said, it can create more widely shared prosperity. So let me just wrap up with a few closing points, and then we'll open for questions. Both automation and augmentation can create value. Both of them can be productive, and they both are creating, billions or trillions of dollars worth of value. But I believe there's two big advantages of the augmentation approach. One is it's a higher ceiling. No offense to my fellow humans, but simply imitating humans is too low a bar. We should have machines that allow us to do new things that we've never done before. And so the idea of the Turing test, which is that we make machines that perfectly imitate humans, that are indistinguishable from humans, I think that might have been an ambitious goal back in 1950 when Alan Turing suggested it, but now I think we realize we actually want to have machines that help us do much more, do new things that we've never could have done before. And I see Andreas up here in front because he and I are working on a set of metrics to better assess whether or not these tools are being used to augment people. And if we have a benchmark, a set of Centaur benchmarks, maybe it'll steer more technology towards these augmentative types of applications rather than merely mimicking or imitating humans. And that's only going to create, I think, a higher ceiling. The other benefit is more likely to lead to widely shared prosperity. If you create a machine that's a close substitute for humans, then it tends to drive down wages. But if you create a machine that complements humans, that augments humans, that tends to drive up wages. And ultimately, that is more likely to lead to widely shared prosperity. The first approach can create value, but mostly the value accrues to the technology owners and the capital owners. The second approach creates value that's much more widely distributed. Either of these outcomes is possible. Neither one of them, I think, is inevitable. And there are a lot of levers we have. This is the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research. So there are certainly some policy levers, things you can do with tax policy, whether you favor capital or labor or incentives for different kinds of outcomes. There are things that managers can do to change the way they're working on things, the way we structure our education and teach people to use these tools in ways that are augmenting. And the technologists themselves, if they're aiming at benchmarks like the Centaur benchmarks, I think they're more likely to create machines that work with humans, and when they appear in the hospital or law firm, people are able to use them and understand how they can create more value. Whereas if we overly focus on these imitation types applications, then when they go in the field, they don't tend to work as well with in human plus machine systems. So that's a big agenda we have at the Digital Economy Lab, is to understand better where those opportunities are, where different jobs are currently, and how we can help shape the trajectory of technology towards this area of wealth creation, but also widely shared prosperity. So let me just stop there and say you can read about all this stuff on these websites. All the papers and research I mentioned are all available for free downloads there. But I want to stop and take some questions. Thanks very much. Okay. Ramin, you can ask me anything you want, like as long as it's not about papers I wrote in 1993.
Erik, if we take this result that you found on the negative employment outcomes at the entry level right now, if we take that seriously, I'd like you to discuss a little bit what the implications of that are. The previous panel, this was referred to as eating your seed corn.
Yeah.
Meaning that that's, entry-level jobs is the way that people acquire skills. You talk to lots of industry leaders, people who are in this space. What are they, when you bring this up with them, what do they say about that? What are the broader implications for the economy, how our labor market works, and how industries work?
Well, people are super worried. They were worried when they were just seeing it anecdotally. They're even more worried when I saw the data. 2 hours ago, I was talking to Julie Sweet and the board of directors of Accenture, and this was a big topic of discussion with that group. We talked about how in Accenture and most companies, they used to have sort of a pyramid where people come in at the entry level and work their way up, and that was becoming more of a diamond, where the base was shrinking because I think there's an implicit contract that we've long had, maybe we haven't explicitly stated it, which is people come in at the entry level and they do a lot of sort of routine, not very exciting work, but in exchange they get skills and they learn some of the tips and tricks of the trade and they become those more experienced workers. But if you no longer need them to do that more basic work, now AI agents are able to do a lot of that, then if you stop hiring them, they're not going to be people rising up through the pyramid or the diamond to that middle level anymore. And ultimately, eating the seed corn is a big challenge. So the problem that we see for young workers today will be a problem for all of us going forward. Now, what do we do about that? I mean, I think there are several different possibilities. One is that these tools themselves actually can be great learning tools. And if you use them to help not just do the work, but also reskill people, that can be incredibly valuable. If you have one-on-one tutoring, you learn about 2 sigma faster than if you learn in a broad classroom, and this is a way of doing one-on-one tutoring at scale. In the study that Lindsay and I did with Danielle, there was a phenomenon where they were using the LLM to answer questions, but at a few points, unfortunately for them, but great for us, the system just crashed and stopped working. So that turned out to be a great natural experiment for us, and we could see what happened to these people when they no longer had this crutch of the LLM, and we thought, uh-oh, now they're really going to be lost. Actually, the opposite. It turned out that when they stopped having access to the LLM, they continued to outperform their peers who were not using the LLM. Now, they weren't as good as when they had the LLM, but they had actually learned something. The LLM had been essentially coaching them all along about what's the right answer at just the right time, and that in-context learning proved to be really valuable. So that was a side effect. It wasn't their design goal when they introduced this tool for helping the call center agents. But imagine if you did that with intention. You said, you know what, we're going to help you learn faster, not just by osmosis, by hanging around with lawyers and consultants and doctors, but actually have the system train you more explicitly. I also think to some extent it's a public good. So training and education, there's a positive externality to that in the sense that if a company invests a lot in training somebody and gives them a lot of new skills, it's a free country, they can take those skills and go to another company, which is great for the employee, but it's going to affect the incentives for the original company to make those investments. So they're going to have an underinvestment in training and education. And this is a problem that's long been recognized in economics. Education and training has these aspects of a public good. Classic ways of doing it is you try to either subsidize it, you encourage it, nonprofits, JFF, and others help out with that. You can have the government support it, universities. So there are other mechanisms where you try to do that, but you can't entirely rely on companies to have the right incentives otherwise. So we need to consider the public goods aspect of it and maybe step up with some of those other organizations and institutions to help out with some of the education. So those are some of the ways. I mean, there's more, but I don't want to monopolize just that one question. Let's take some other questions. Yeah. How about over here? Do we get a mic? Sorry to make you run there. It's actually great. I like that people are saying their name before. So.
Hi, I'm Joel Friedman.
Yeah.
Your last slide suggested that the augmentation model would create shared prosperity and increase wages. And I'm curious as to the evidence to that. I'm going to jump on your Julie Sweet example because I spent my career with Accenture and was on the board there.
Okay.
Okay, extent,
so yeah, I just talked to all your follow-on board members.
Right, and they're really struggling with what to do
in
this economy. As I invest in AI tools, I'm going to fund that to a certain degree by substituting my salary dollars. And in a pre-AI world, I paid premium for human knowledge. As the augmentation model takes root, I'm enhancing and mitigating the need to go out and develop more specialized human knowledge. Is there a possibility that will slow down wage growth?
Well, I think a lot depends on how, the nuance of what you mean by automation and augmentation. So almost by definition, I mean it as things that allow people to do new things, increase the value of them. And actually, a lot of people think that technology inevitably replaces labor and makes labor less valuable. But through most of history, the opposite has been the case. I mean, if you look at what is the value of an hour of human labor in like 1790 or 1890 or 1990 or today, it's pretty much gone up the whole time, maybe not steadily, there's been some ups and downs. And the reason that businesses are willing to pay more for an hour of human labor, a lot more, like 30 times more than they did a couple hundred years ago, is because what? Is because they're augmented with all these additional technologies that have mostly augmented, sometimes substitute, but on balance, technology has been mainly an augmentative use. And I think that there's room for AI to be used the same way, to augment it. It doesn't have to be. I showed you some data where there were less employment. Actually, one thing I didn't show you, but is also in the paper, is what happened to wages. And there's a little discussion in the earlier panel. The effect on wages was striking, and I don't know that I entirely understand it, but let me tell you what the effect was. The effect was basically zero. So when you looked at those same groups, we did not see much of a change in wages. And I have two hypotheses about that, and maybe you guys have some thoughts on it as well. One is that wages are just a little bit sticky. It's kind of hard to lower the wages of somebody who's already working there. Maybe there's room for it going up, but not for going down. So they'll, over time, maybe we'll see more of an effect, but it's more sticky than just not hiring them in the first place. The other hypothesis is a little bit more intellectually interesting. David Otter and Neil Thompson have a new paper where they described how if a job is a bundle of tasks, which it is, that AI could affect different parts of that bundle. AI could mostly affect the lower skill, lower expertise tasks, or AI might affect some of the higher skill tasks. In the first case, the remaining tasks are actually going to be more valuable, and the job will be sort of upskilled. It's taken away some of the scut work, some of the boring stuff, and the person now is actually a more skilled person, and you might actually see wages go up. In the second case, where AI is taking away some of the higher end tasks, then the remaining tasks will be require less expertise, and wages will go down. And they show in their paper that either one of those things can happen, and happens in different occupations. So maybe what we're seeing in the Canary's paper is that AI is affecting different tasks in these occupations, in particular with coders, even though there's less demand for the entry-level people, or maybe because there's less demand, it's reflecting the fact that some of the lower skilled tasks in that occupation are being replaced, and there's not the remaining people are actually commanding a higher wage, even if the people who are entry-level aren't getting as many jobs. But I mean, I think it's a complicated question, what you're asking, and I think that it's what we should be focusing our research agenda on going forward is doing more to diagnose what's happening, what's actually happening in the labor market, having a dashboard that we're creating at the Digital Economy Lab to see which tasks are growing, which are shrinking, whether or not wages are going up or down, employment going up or down, and how AI is affecting it. And with that diagnosis, we can develop a prescription. Okay, what can we do going forward? What kinds of programs, at JFF, at the U.S. government, elsewhere, can we do to try to create more of the widely shared prosperity and have the technology used in a way that raises wages? Lots of hands. I'll try and go quicker. I think you were next, so yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Right. Okay, we have two mics coming at you.
Okay.
Hi, Eric. It's Taryn from Golden Gate.
Yeah.
I asked this at the last panel. I don't know if you were here, but I think I'm skeptical that we can do this. I'm skeptical, like your definition that you just gave of augmentation is that it's technology that creates more jobs, more or less, or technology
makes human labor more valuable.
Makes human labor more valuable.
Yeah.
And that seems like a post hoc description rather than something that we can use to predict in advance. And we need to be able to predict it in advance in order for us to make these choices that you're saying we can make. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, did you ask a question a little bit like this earlier?
Yes,
too?
I did, yes.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a really important question. I'll say two things. First, I'll say it is really hard, but I don't think we absolutely have to predict it in advance in order to work it. I don't know all the different ways that we can reduce carbon emissions, but if we put in a carbon tax, all these other people are going to figure out, oh, you know what, I could bike to work. I didn't know that you could have biked to work instead of driving your car, or you could have carpooled. Maybe you can't, maybe you can. I don't have to know. All I have to do is put in place a set of incentives, and then, 1,000 flowers will bloom and people will figure out ways that none of us could have thought of in advance. So part of it is setting up the regulatory and tax incentives. So, in the Turing Trap paper and also in Daron's Acemoglu's paper, they talk about we talk about creating tax incentives that encourage people to do more augmentation, and they'll figure out different ways. Secondly, I'm not ready to give up on the fact that we can identify ways that's done. We have a research agenda. One of the things I want to do is go through all of the different tasks, and we're doing this, and see which ones are have the augmentative uses of the technology and which ones don't. And we'll start identifying patterns, and we'll start seeing, okay, this is something that we'd like to scale up. This is something maybe we'd like to discourage. So we don't have that roadmap yet, but that's something I want to try to create. And last but not least, let me point to Andy here in front, because as I work with a lot of technologists, I've been just blown away at how weirdly good they are at hitting targets once you put them up there. One of the big problems in AI research is benchmark saturation, that somebody creates a benchmark, and they're there, okay, here's the benchmark for the next 5 years of AI research, and then like 5 weeks later, someone says, oh, we've mastered it. And it's a good problem to have, I guess. But it highlights to me how the power of setting these benchmarks and goals. Almost all the benchmarks, if you look at the Stanford AI Index, almost all the benchmarks are standalone AI benchmarks. How well can AI do this problem all by itself? It's cheating if a human helps it. It would be cheating if a human used a machine to help them with their homework. Andy and I have a different perspective. What if it wasn't cheating? What if that was the whole point? What if we put a goal up there and said, we want a benchmark that diagnoses disease when the radiologist and the machine are working together? Because right now, having a radiology AI black box that says, remove the patient's left lung, and the doctor says, why? And the machine says, probability 0.9. What are you going to do with that? I don't know. I guess, do you operate? Maybe. I don't know. It's not nearly as valuable as one that's optimized for the human and machine in the first. So these benchmarks, I think, will literally change the trajectory of work. So, that's a more hopeful answer, I hope. How about right next to you there? Is the mic already there? Okay. All right. How much time do we have here? Okay.
Thanks, Erik. This is Shail Kumar.
Yeah.
With the changing work and workforce, what are universities doing to prepare the future workforce, doing well, and what they should be doing, what they're not doing enough of?
Yeah. I don't think we're doing a very good job. I was talking to Andrew Ng the other day, and he was complaining that he's working with a lot of companies, and paradoxically, a lot of people graduating from Stanford and elsewhere, when they go into these companies, they know all about the theory of software development and how to do it on their own. A lot of them haven't actually spent a lot of time working with these coding tools like Claude Code, et cetera, and they learn that on the job. And he thinks that's a big mistake, that we should be using those tools in the classroom, and I think he's right. It's not a matter of switching to doing like practical short-term stuff versus long-term stuff. What you want to do is teach the long-term principles in the context of these more current tools. And so I think we can do more of that going forward. And we need to, it's a pain, but we need to reinvent our curriculums extensively. Like in my class, I have all these assignments, some of which I've been using variants of for like a decade or more, and they don't work anymore because now I took my assignments, I put them into ChatGPT or Gemini, and does a pretty good answer to a lot of them. So, and of course the students know that too. So I've had to reinvent. I'm not going to say don't use the LLMs. That would, I think, be defeating the purpose. Anyways, they wouldn't listen. So what I do, well, I cold call in class. That helps a little bit, but I have 150 students, so that's not very incentive compatible. So what I did, this is kind of fun. I created an Erik avatar. I trained an avatar based on my readings and stuff. And the Erik avatar will also read the student's assignment each week. And each student has to have a 5 to 10 minute conversation, video, with the Erik avatar. I don't have time to do all those conversations, but the AI does. And then it's recorded. And I decided not to have the avatar grade them. I decided that was one step too far. The TAs will grade them. But the students have to be able to answer live questions, in real time, kind of the way I would have. And I asked them how the students liked it. They kind of liked it. Some didn't. A lot of them did like it. Weirdly, one of the main complaints they had was the avatar was too nice and didn't push them hard enough. So whatever. We turned the dial up a little bit on meanness. Over here. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. Matthew Frank, Stanford Medicine, and undergraduate and Sloan Fellow. So some of the greatest breakthroughs I've seen is from cross-discipline thinking. So I'm a huge fan of SIEPR, huge fan of BioX, where you have to pull from a minimum of 3 different departments to solve very complex interdisciplinary problems. So whether some of my heroes are Len and Lee Herzenberg that invented the flow cytometry machine, so you do automated cell sorting. But they started as geneticists, and then they trained in monoclonal antibodies, and then they had to do a fluorescent tag. So BioX is full of those all the time. And I'm wondering how AI can encourage enough framing of questions that are cross-discipline questions to have huge jumps in solutions to very complex problems, including things like global warming.
Well, this is, the biggest opportunity is using AI to go after some of those big questions, big scientific questions. And I think there's a huge amount of potential there. Mostly now it's been using, these very narrow questions, like helping someone with their call center on their tax advice or whatever. But if we could get it to speed up the pace of scientific discovery and answering these good questions, we would not just have a level increase, but we'd have a slope increase, and that would be immense. I think there's a lot of promise in that, and people like Demis Hassabis and Google DeepMind are very focused on it. They got a Nobel Prize for some of the work, as you know, with AlphaFold. Mostly, I think it's still emerging. I don't think, we see it happening as much. I'll come back to the collaboration and augmentation point, though. I think trying to have a machine do the invention all by itself is hard, but having it turbocharge a human researcher, an interdisciplinary team that has the geneticist, the cell biologist, the chemist, and the AI all working together, I think is likely to speed up discovery a lot. Certainly, I use it a lot in when we did the Canaries paper, it wrote a lot of the code and did a lot of the checking, and so I think a lot of economists, a lot of researchers are using AI to speed up the rate of creating research, and that we'll hopefully see that happening more and more.
We have to
One more?
end the session. We're
Okay.
going to run.
Okay.
Eric, I think you should make the Erik avatar available to the,
Yeah,
for the
that's a
extended
good
Q&A.
idea.
But please join me in thanking Erik for a fantastic presentation and discussion.